Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a massive win for immigrant rights, the Supreme Court has ruled against President Trump's attempt to end DACA, a program that protects nearly 700,000 immigrants from deportation. In 2017, Trump tried to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program created by President Obama in 2012. But in Thursday's 5-4 decision, led by Chief Justice John Roberts, the court concluded Trump's total rescission of DACA was, quote, arbitrary and capricious. A group of dreamers celebrated the ruling outside the Supreme Court. Grace Martinez-Rosas is the deputy director of United We Dream.
I'm elated. I am really affirmed that the movement of young people organizing 11 million undocumented people demanding exactly what we deserve, we win. And so I'm honored to be here today at the Supreme Court and ready to keep fighting for more.
We'll have more on the DACA ruling after headlines. The global death toll from the COVID-19 pandemic has topped 450,000, and the spread of the coronavirus continues to accelerate in much of the world. The New York Times reports 77 nations have reported a growth in new cases over the past 2 weeks. On Thursday, a number of countries, including Mexico and Indonesia, reported a record one-day increase in confirmed cases. Here in the United States, the U.S. coronavirus death toll has topped 118,000. California has ordered residents to wear masks outside. California Governor Gavin Newsom issued the order after California reported a record 4,000 new COVID cases Wednesday. In Florida, 75% of the state's ICU beds are now occupied. On Thursday, Florida reported 3,207 coronavirus cases, shattering the previous one-day high. The Navajo Nation has reinstated a weekend lockdown due to a recent surge in COVID cases in Arizona. At least 322 Navajos have already died from COVID, a toll higher than 16 states. In other news from Arizona, a county sheriff who refused to enforce the state's stay-at-home restrictions has now tested positive for coronavirus. Sheriff Mark Lamb of Pinal County tested positive just before he was scheduled to travel to Washington to attend a ceremony for President Trump's new policing executive order. Meanwhile, Oklahoma reported a record number of new COVID cases on Thursday for the 5th consecutive day. President Trump's traveling to Tulsa, Oklahoma, Saturday for his first large indoor rally in months. Trump's refused to cancel the event despite warnings from public health officials who fear the rally could turn into a super spreader event. Attendees will be asked to sign coronavirus liability waivers to prevent future lawsuits against the campaign, but they will not be required to wear masks. President Trump is also expected to be greeted by protesters in Tulsa. The filmmaker Eugene Jarecki has announced he's bringing the Trump death clock to Tulsa. The clock tallies the number of American lives lost due to government inaction during the pandemic. The toll is now over 71,000. President Trump was originally slated to speak in Tulsa today on the holiday known as Juneteenth. It was June 19, 1865, that enslaved Africans in Texas first learned they were free, 2 years after Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Trump moved the date of the speech after facing widespread criticism. On Thursday, Trump told the Wall Street Journal, quote, "I did something good. I made Juneteenth very famous. It's actually an important event, an important time, but nobody had ever heard of it," he said. The Wall Street Journal reports Trump learned of the holiday, which has been celebrated for over 150 years, from one of his own Secret Service agents, who's black. Meanwhile, members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union plan to mark Juneteenth by shutting down the country's West Coast ports to show solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And in Washington, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi ordered the removal of 4 Confederate portraits from the House ahead of Juneteenth.
There's no room in the hallowed halls of this democracy, this temple of democracy, to memorialize people who embody violent bigotry and grotesque racism of the Confederacy.
A Confederate monument was also removed overnight in Decatur, Georgia. In news from Atlanta, the 2 police officers charged in the killing of Rashard Brooks in the parking lot of a Wendy's turned themselves in on Thursday. Former officer Garrett Rolfe, who faces felony murder and 10 other charges, is being held without bond. He was reportedly moved from the Fulton County Jail to another facility due to security concerns. Officer Devin Brosnan, who faces an aggravated assault charge, was released on Thursday after posting bond. Meanwhile, the Atlanta Police Foundation has announced it's giving every police officer in Atlanta a $500 bonus. The news came less than a day after officers in the department staged a sick-out to protest charges filed against the killing of Rashard Brooks. The Air Force Inspector General has launched a probe into the use of military surveillance airplanes to monitor protesters in Washington, D.C. and Minneapolis. The planes reportedly beamed live footage to law enforcement agencies, including the FBI. The New York Times reports an elite special operations unit of the Pennsylvania National Guard supported the aircraft from the ground in Washington. One of the highest-ranking African-Americans in the Trump administration's resigned in protest. On Thursday, Mary Elizabeth Taylor submitted her resignation as the Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. In her resignation letter, Taylor wrote, quote, "The president's comments and actions surrounding racial injustice and Black Americans cut sharply against my core values and convictions." Prior to her State Department post, she worked in the Trump White House and as an aide to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. At the White House, she helped shepherd more than 400 presidential appointments through the Senate confirmation process, including Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. During Gorsuch's televised confirmation hearing, Taylor prominently sat behind him every day. In political news, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar has removed herself from consideration to be Joe Biden's running mate. On Thursday, she urged Biden to pick a woman of color. Another 1.5 million people filed unemployment claims last week, bringing the total to 45 million since the coronavirus crisis began. This marks the 13th week in a row in which more than 1 million people filed for unemployment. This comes as the total wealth of the nation's billionaires has jumped by nearly $600 billion since March 18th. This, according to a report by Americans for Tax Fairness. During this period, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos made $44 billion. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg made $32 billion. In other Facebook news, the social media platform has taken down a Trump campaign ad that displayed a symbol once used by the Nazis. The red triangle was used to identify communists and other political prisoners in concentration camps. Facebook claimed the post violated its policy against organized hate. The move came a day after the NAACP and other civil rights groups called on advertisers to boycott Facebook during the month of July as part of a campaign called Stop Hate for Profit. Meanwhile, Twitter has labeled a doctored video tweeted by Trump to be manipulated media for the first time. The fake video purported to be a CNN report about a racist baby. In Brazil, authorities in Sao Paulo have arrested the former advisor and driver of Flavio Bull Senado, the son of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Prosecutors say between 2016 and 17, Fabricio Queiroz ran a scheme of paying salaries to phantom employees while working at the office of Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, who was at the time a Rio de Janeiro state lawmaker. In religious news, the Vatican's urging Catholics to divest from fossil fuel companies and arms manufacturers. Last month, a group of 42 Methodist, Anglican, Quaker, Buddhist, and Quaker organizations and Catholic organizations issued a joint pledge to divest from fossil fuel companies. In climate news, new research shows pregnant people in the United States are exposed to high temperatures and air pollution triggered by the climate crisis, far more likely to have children who are premature, underweight, or stillborn. The study says Black pregnant people and newborn babies are particularly at risk, as African Americans are more likely to live in polluted areas. A group of major Wall Street investors are pouring money into an effort to defeat New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in next week's Democratic primary. Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, Blackstone CEO Steve Schwarzman, and hedge fund billionaire Paul Tudor Jones have all backed AOC's challenger, Michelle Caruso Cabrera, a former CNBC reporter who was a registered Republican until 2015. Egypt's crackdown on the LGBTQ community is back in the spotlight this week after a prominent queer Egyptian activist died by suicide in Toronto, Canada, where she'd sought asylum. Sarah Hegassi was 30 years old. 3 years ago, Egyptian authorities detained her after she was photographed waving a rainbow flag at a rock concert. Authorities charged her with, quote, promoting sexual deviancy and debauchery. In detention, she was tortured with electric shocks and held in solitary confinement. She was released after 3 months, but continued to face death threats in Egypt. She then fled to Canada. This is Mustafa Fouad, her attorney and friend.
In her letters from jail and the diary entries she wrote in prison, she used to say the world will only change through love, no matter how much they hate me or hate people like me, no matter how much they hate anyone who's different. Still, the only thing that will change the world is love and coexistence. This was her true faith in life, that humanity is what will save the world.
Iconic Amazon indigenous Kayapo chief, Paulinho Payakan, has died of COVID-19. He was 66 years old. Payakan was a lifelong defender of the Amazon rainforest who in the 1980s led the resistance against the Belo Monte hydroelectric project, an environmentally destructive massive complex of dams planned to be built on the Xingu River in the heart of the Amazon. The project was successfully suspended at the time, but later reinstated in 2011. In recent years, Payakan had warned against Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's calls to open the Amazon for agriculture and mining. As coronavirus cases continue to surge in Brazil, the pandemic has taken a toll on indigenous communities with nearly 5,500 reported cases and close to 300 deaths. You can go to our interview with the great photographer Sebastião Salgado to talk about the situation in the Brazilian Amazon. And a correction. On Wednesday, we reported on the death of Titi Gully, a black trans woman who was found hanged from a tree in Portland, Oregon. She died in May 2019, not in 2020. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman.